This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight, my guest is Charles Topham. Is that right?
That's good enough, Seriah.
All right.
I'll let you off with that. Yeah.
And we've been talking about having you on for quite a while. You contacted me. Wow, I don't even, it's been close to a year since the first time you contacted me. And you have some really fascinating stuff that you've done over the years. And one of the aspects that really interests me, and I want you to tell people a little bit about who you are first, but is the apportations and stuff. And I think that was the headline of the first email you sent me was, let's talk about apports, because to me, I find that stuff showing up in every aspect of the paranormal. It's one of those common, familiar things along with poltergeist phenomena that you see like everywhere, and you've had some very personal experiences with this stuff. So why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself and what you've done?
Okay. Now, you see, nothing happens in a vacuum. And if I was to do the Radio Mysterioso thing, I go back to when I caught my first mackerel at 7 years old and then start from there. But, you know, it is a bit like that, really, because I started getting stuff happening when I was quite young. And the main stuff started with a bog standard UFO experience as a young boy. It was pretty much a saucer thing, like a seed shape with a line through it. That seemed to trigger lots of other things that came afterwards. My grandfather was a huge influence upon me, and he was the font of all knowledge to me. He was a wood carver and a turner, and he read lots of books on things like the Gita, and he was into herbal medicine and all kinds. And he'd been a dowser in World War I, locating trenches where the Germans were digging and so forth. And he learned that from Yorkshire miners. So I grew up with his influence, not my father's really, guiding me to look at this and look at that and look at the other. And one of the strong points when I first got to know him properly was he'd been a member of the Spiritualist Church. And one day, after seeing a figure standing by him, this is after the UFO thing, and I said to him, do you believe in ghosts? And that's what happened. I described the woman I'd seen. He said, what you've seen is my mum. I could see the period costume and everything, because he was born in about 1895, so she would have been probably 1860s or something. So, that happened. Lots of things happened after that when I got into my teens. I was a prolific reader, even as a kid. My dad read to me when I was young. My granddad was always lending me books. Arthur Findlay, On the Edge of the Etheric, Horace Leaf, What Mediumship Is. And he had a lot of interest in so many things. He would look at anything. He did telepathy experiments. He corresponded with a man called Tom Lethbridge, who was a Cambridge Don. He wrote books on original pendulum work.
Yeah, T.C. Lethbridge.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I was really privileged to have met him
really?
At my granddad's house. Yeah. He had relatives at Nestcliff in Shropshire, which is where I'm born and bred. And he used to correspond with my granddad, and they used to do experiments, telepathy experiments, and also they would do the pendulum experiments. Yeah, the things and I grew up with that. My granddad would give me a pendulum because he was a wood turner. He would make them. And he said, you can use chewing gum, you can use anything. You don't have to have anything special. Yeah. And he would turn me a pendulum, and then we would draw a map of the garden, and he'd say, look, there's some kittens that died when they were born, and I buried them. I want you to find them. So he would get me map dowsing, which came along very useful later on in life. And I grew up with that all around me, but I told him about the UFO experience and he discounted it totally. He was still hanging on to what's the point of the, and I was saying, because I was a member of a thing called Contact at the time with Brinsley Lepore Trench. And I said I'd seen this thing and I'm going to write up a report and all these other people. And one day we're going to have the biggest directory of all the sightings everywhere. And he said it's rubbish. It wouldn't mean anything. And I actually believed sometime later that I think I understood what he meant. And the one thing that has coloured me all of my life is the experiences I was part of on my own or with other people. They were, for me, those experiences, they changed me in so many ways, many ways. They, a life that I wouldn't have had without them, really. Tom Lethbridge, wonderful man. I never heard anybody with a posh voice like that. He didn't sound like he came from Shropshire. He sounded quite educated. And in those days, he'd written a book, and I didn't know anybody that had written a book. It was quite a big thing, that was,
Yeah, I've only been familiar with him in the last, 5 or 6 years. The Clandestine, Martin Walkier's latest project, did a song called T.C. Lethbridge talking about him, and I went, who the hell's T.C. Lethbridge? And so I looked him up, and all of his books are a fortune on Amazon, but I was able to find a compilation of his work for less than a fortune and picked that up and was pretty impressed with the way he kind of took this stuff apart.
Yeah, and it was original. Do you know, he coined, this is something you would understand in having done this podcast for quite a long time and the people you've spoken to. We talk about skeptics, we talk about the academia and how they bound together. He suffered. He really suffered. He was a Cambridge Don, and people would stop eating at the same table and things like that because he was into dowsing. He was doing original intuitive work with a pendulum. And not just looking at what you could find under the ground, what you could find in the next dimension and dreams and so forth. He was an incredible man. And he called it academic trade unionism. And it's a wonderful phrase because it still goes on now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Big time.
Absolutely.
Big time. I have a real thing about skeptics. I really do. I've met a few of them. And then I'm talking about the skeptics that they call themselves skeptics, but they're debunkers. They have an aggressive attitude.
They know all the answers.
Yeah. There's loads of them out there. I'm amazed. And more within ufology, whatever that's supposed to be nowadays. I mean, it's all of these words have just played out. They don't mean anything more. It's like in the 60s when people used to talk about something being fab, John Lennon, it's totally fab. And you're talking about the fabulous treasures of Solomon. The word didn't mean anything. And all of these words like UFO and paranormal and shamanic. I mean, I upset Josh the other night, I think, in a quiet way, because I was using this word all the time. And I wrote back to him later saying, I will find a better synonym and I will send it to you. Forgive me. And,
a better word than shamanic?
Shamanic, yeah. Because sometimes it's the only way I can describe the things that happened. Yeah. And some of the things I do, the practices, and that seems to be, and I've heard other researchers, other writers say it's probably the fundamental one. Even John Alexander, I found a very interesting interview with him when he said you strip it all back and that's almost what you're looking at. That's the core of all the phenomena.
Yeah.
I mean, even and what I'm not name dropping when I say this, but I did have a Skype session with Shannon Taggart not that long ago. And I was fascinated because I think what she's doing is really important. And Susan Demeter St. Clair as well. There's a common thread with what they're doing and the way they're presenting it. And they have a way of looking at things I don't think a man has. And I'd probably get stoned for saying that in some quarters. I think they have an intuitive thing, but the way Shannon was describing the spiritualist thing as a sort of magical, a spiritual magico practice is essentially a shamanic thing, and what Susan is looking at and the work that she's doing, I think, is that. And they're not the only people, but they're the ones I've had the closest contact with as practitioners, as say, just opposed to an armchair thing, really.
Right.
Ask me a deep, meaningful question, because I'm rambling here.
But it was interesting. I had a question, and now I've lost it. Let's get into a little bit of the apportation. Now, you got into this. Was a Ouija board initially?
Well,
how did this group come together that you eventually started doing this psychic questing and apportation with?
oh, right. No, I'm okay with that. I was working in London in a bookshop called Mysteries, and I met my then to be girlfriend Angela, and she sort of moved out of home, and I was living in I'd moved away out of London, and we decided one Christmas in 1988 we would have a Christmas in Llanberis. Now, what happened there was we been to a huge New Age fair, seen this guy bought some crystals, and he's got a card for a flat that he had in Llanberis, which is in North Wales. It's near Bethgelert, where you probably know the legend. You might not.
No.
Oh, okay. Bethgelert it's a story of a dog that stayed by its master's grave, and stuff like that.
Okay.
They found the dead baby by the side of the thing, and they thought the dog had eaten it, and actually it wasn't. The dog was protecting it from a wolf, and the Lord killed it and stuff like that. So they put up a monument. It's more myth than it is fact, but it's a great
Gotcha.
one, So what happened was we went up to Llanberis. We stayed in this place over Christmas, and there was this overriding feeling that something was trying to get through to us, and it was a very much a strong presence. And I said to Ange one night, I said, it really feels like something's trying to come through. And Ange had come through the spiritualist church, and I'd known about it through my granddad, and we'd done the Ouija board separately on, I had all the UFO stuff with the Ouija board and things. And we put together this table in this tiny little flat in Llanberis, and we did the Ouija board. And the odd thing is, I actually found the book from the sessions only a matter of 3 or 4 days ago, the original sessions in '88.
Really?
Yeah, really strange to find it, because I didn't even know I'd got it anymore, because so many records have disappeared. I've had records, disappear off my computer. I've lost Apports. We'd even forgotten about Apports we'd had, and I was reminded years later. And what happened was we did the Ouija board, and this thing came through, and it started talking about finding a sword. Then it was finding 2 swords and finding stones. And it kept coming through with this stuff on a daily basis every time we did it. And Ange kept getting some just incredible stuff about a woman holding a sword, and there having been some trouble with a group, and the sword was hidden. And it went on like this. And I think on hindsight, looking at these records, she might have been picking up on what we later knew as the Mary Heath story, which is things, to the Greenstone, the Eye of Fire, and so forth. And our group came after all of those things, and it was almost like a continuity link. But coming back to the Bethgelert stuff, we did all of this, and Ange found a bedsit, a huge bedsit in an old Tudor hall. And I went from Shrewsbury, where I'd been staying above my mum's place, actually, in a bungalow. I had the bedroom above the place. So we both moved in together. And very quickly, there was a feeling of something going on. We were told that we'd find stones and so forth. And we moved into this place. And there was an Anglo-Saxon camp next to us. There was huge sandstone blocks near us, huge, and what we found later on, and we had a conversation with Graham and a few other people, if you've got sandstone and you've got granite with quartz in it, it seems to retain something, whether you call it chi or prana or telluric energy or something. It seems to have free electrons going around it, which seem to facilitate psychic stuff. We started getting all kinds of strange dreams. I had a very clear image one night of being of a woman, and it was a very tall woman. I would probably now describe it as something elvish, and very tall, with a very bright light, almost luminescent. And I described it in Andy's book as almost like a figure in a Star Trek transporter room. Ange had the same thing on the same night. after that, I was working part-time for a friend of the family, and my overalls were on the floor. And next to the overalls, I went into the shower, dumped my overalls, went into the shower, came back out, and there was a tooth right next to them. And it hadn't fallen out of my pockets. This is the one thing about Apports. If this is one of the things that if you have an Apport experience yourself, there are absolutely no doubts, and yet there are every doubt. You're in this state where it just goes. It's like the two of pentacles in the tarot card. You see them juggling, going backwards and forwards, and it has that effect because I knew there was nothing on the floor because I'd seen a clean fall. I put my overalls on it. When I came back out, this thing was there, and that set the pattern for pretty much every Apport that ever happened to me. We found the swords, basically 2 swords that were 2 of 7, and that happened through dreams. And the morning, I kept having this really strong sense of presence. Now, what intrigued me...
Let's go into the swords a little bit. Tell people about how you found the swords. Like, how did that whole thing unravel?
That was, I mean, this went on. Ange and I used to go out on excursions, and she would come from Coventry, which is where she was from, and she would come and stay with me at weekends in this tiny little bedroom, and we would go out on day trips everywhere. And we went to a place called Mitchellfold Stone Circle, which was probably about 20 miles from Shrewsbury. And we went out there one night when it was an incredibly frosty night. Bright, full moon, no stars in the sky, just, no clouds rather, just the moon, the stars. And it was incredibly quiet. There was nobody there. And you have to walk up a long bank to get to this place. It's a lovely stone circle. It's beautiful. It's incredible views and everything, And we got up there. And we stood, and the moon was so bright it was casting shadows of the stones, and it was no pun. It was stone still. That's a Neolithic pun for you. They don't come faster than that. And we were there, very very quiet and looking at, just taking in the atmosphere. There was the odd owl hooting, and then we didn't feel it. We heard it, the sound of thunder. And it was underneath us somewhere. It wasn't an earth tremor. It was the sound of thunder, and there was no movement, nothing. And it happened 3 times. And I looked at Ange and said, "Can you hear that?" Well, what do you bloody think? It was really quite clear. And it felt like it was in the sky, but it also felt like it was coming from the stones. And we went back home. And the other thing that happened was we had a flash of lightning. We were driving in daytime. And as we came around a corner somewhere up in Derbyshire, this flash of lightning, it came from the sky down to the earth, right next to where we were driving on a totally clear, sunny day. And after this, we started getting dreams. We went to different sites like the Rollright Stones. We went there where Paul Devereux had been working. And one of our friends, a mutual friend, and I met her through Ange, was a woman called Jean Astle, who was a librarian locally, and she'd been part of the Greenstone, the Eye of Fire group, and it built up. And there was one feeling I had got used to with the UFO stuff that had happened in my teens, was the feeling you've got to go now, you've got to go onto that hill, just do it at that moment, and it would build up, and it was a compulsion. It felt like something was pushing in the middle of my back, and I would go, something would happen. And other people within the group had that, the UFO thing. Same with psychic questing. You must go to this car boot. You will go to the car boot. And this thing was just a car boot sale, and it was so rough and ready. We stopped going, and I got there, and this guy got a couple of swords out. And I knew what they were. I looked at them. I didn't recognize them. I hadn't connected them with all the other stuff. But I just thought, I've got to have these. And the guy looked at me, and he said, "There's £7, and I won't split them up. They've got to be sold as a pair." And I said, "I'll give you £6.50." And he said, "Yeah, done." So I got 50 pence knocked off. And he wrapped them up in paper. And he looked at me, but what was really intriguing, I look back, even at the time, it was like he was in a trance saying it. It wasn't his voice. It was all, it had a slight echo to it. It had a sense of a voice coming from somewhere else. Because when I'd done the transaction, I'd given them the money and was walking off, it was somebody else that was talking. So whether something was, something had possessed him for a while or something was channeling through, I don't know. I mean, it's just speculation anyway, but first impressions stayed with me for quite a while,
Yeah.
That meant we had 2 swords. And the first thing Angie and I said was, how are we going to explain this to Jean? Because Jean had been part of this thing. She looked for the original sword. She'd looked for copies. She'd looked for anything that was remotely resembling it. She'd been on antique dealers lists. She'd gone around to car boots. She'd gone around to arms fairs looking for anything that looked like the original sword, which Andy found in 1979. So there were 3 swords. There were 2 that were found by Colin and Gilly Padden. They had dreams. Or Colin actually had the recurring dream, and he was thrown on his in this dream. He was thrown on his face, and in front of him was a particular tuft of grass and something like that. And he thought, well, I know where this is. And long story short, he went out there with his wife and a couple of other people, and he got thrown onto his face again. And in front of him were two little knobbly bits sticking out of the turf, and they were the swords, and they would only come out as a pair. So the sword saga started to build up, and a friend of mine, Derek Thompson, introduced us to Andy because he'd been part of an earlier group that Andy had an Earth Mysteries group. So eventually we got to know that there were.
Andy is
Andrew Collins.
Okay,
we knew him when he was Andy. He's respectable now. He's I'm not taking the mickey. I mean, he's doing really good stuff. He kicked off a lot. I mean, I've one of my great joys when I look back on things is that to have been part of it. He's a wonderful man. If you ever get to meet him, he's really kind. He's very funny, knowledgeable. And a real grafter with his books.
Well, even in his latest book, he kind of did a bit of psychic questing with the whole location of Eden thing.
Oh, yeah. You see, he's using it for bigger stuff. I mean, I spoke to him not that long ago, really, and I wanted to get some feedback on Apports and, a couple of stories and things like that. Because my intention was to get a podcast together for psychic questers. Really, because if you knew the amount of stories, I didn't even know. Seriah, I had no idea. I mean, I got in touch with, or the chap got in touch with me, a chap called Wayne Frostick, who was part of the latter 7 Swords group. And Wayne has been such a good friend since then. And he's put other people in touch with me because I'm not on Facebook. I don't want anything to do with it. After the Cambridge Analytica thing, and over here, I just want nothing to do with it. I would ask one day if they really got hacked, or did they give the data away?
Right.
Instagram and all the other stuff I just can't be arsed with it. I'm 65. I do well without it. I really just cannot be arsed with it. So Andy got in touch and I said, are you interested in doing an interview and that? But he said, look, this is what I've come from. I will always honor it, and I will always pay it respects. But he's got so much going on with the Göbekli Tepe.
Göbekli Tepe, yep.
Yeah, thank you. I must put my teeth back in. You're in a jar on the shelf. I didn't know it was going to be a long interview. And, he's got all of that stuff going on. And I think probably there's far more soul satisfaction in what he's doing than, say, doing the psychic stuff. Because it's like we talked about it many times and with other people. Whatever you do, whatever you say, you have that experience. The only other person who's going to really understand, the only other person is somebody who's been through it. Otherwise, it's just academic. It really is. I mean, when I was talking to Shannon, one of the things that got me hooked was she said she's had Apports and one of them went and came back again. I've got a ring which has done that. And I left it when I was in hospital after my first heart attack, and I phoned them up to see if they could find it in the shower and so forth. They couldn't find it anywhere. The next day, it appeared in a made bed. I pulled back the sheets and changed the sheets. When I came back after putting new sheets on the bed, the ring was there, and that's how I got that ring. Is another story that wasn't part of the Addy group. Coming back to the Addy group, had the swords. We had the tooth, and then Graham Phillips, who was a friend to Ange. She met him through Jean. Jean was a really good friend. She used to take the lads in quite frequently and feed them and stuff like that. Very maternal. Anne, who was Angela's sister, and Martin, an old family friend. They were doing things like hypnosis with Graham, and he was teaching Martin the techniques and so forth. And the whole thing was that we'd moved into this old Tudor hall, and we had blind springs underneath us. I mentioned this to Josh recently because I felt it might be important. That whole genius loci thing, the sacred spring thing. And there were blind springs that came up underneath the kitchen, and they were held in reservoirs underneath, and that's where all the psychic stuff happened. And one day I said to our contact, is there anybody there? And she said, I'm always here. And it made me, and I got a very clear image of the springs, and I wondered if that's what it was. But we started doing the Ouija board there as an experiment. It was a wonderful place. It was warm. It was in the middle of the countryside. A fantastic landlord and landlady who were just so nice to us, really, really kind to us. It was a big adventure for Ange and I, and for Anne and Martin, and Graham came to join us. We knew about the Greenstone. When I worked in London, I bought the Parasurge magazine when it came out. I used to buy it every time on my way to work. So I knew a lot about the background. I'd read the books. I'd read the small stuff that Andy had put out, The Sword and the Stone. So I had some idea, but it was a long time ago. It was probably about 10 years previously. And at the time I thought, well, maybe some of it, but not all of it. And then we got involved with all of this stuff. And I tell you now, whatever you see, if you read the Greenstone, if you read the Eye of Fire, the Seven Swords, and there's other stuff as well, what goes into those books is nothing compared to all the other stuff that happened. The little stories that happened to other people that were part of this great mosaic, this great jigsaw of things that included UFOs, that included Apports, visions of mythic people, visions of Sumerian gods and goddesses, and it's plugging into the landscape and then plugging into the whole planet. You never knew what you were going to work with from one week to another to another. And it's fantastic. So we started doing the Ouija board just as a laugh, really, not in any sort of schoolgirly, giggly way. None of that. We just thought, let's give it a go, because we'd all done it. We'd all done it before. We'd had the Apport. We'd had the stuff happening at Beth Gellet. Anne and Martin came up through the Spiritualist Church, so they knew about Apports and things like that. So we gave it, and we really got results fairly quickly, very quickly indeed. The Apports always happened where you never saw them appear. I mean, I think I mentioned that. On Radio Mysteriosa. My favorite is the shuffling of the cards, but we had others that you never knew when they were going to appear.
Well, tell people exactly what you would do. You would do a Ouija session.
Yeah,
and
we have. Yeah. Okay. Go on. Ask. Yeah.
No.
After you.
So from the Ouija session, what would occur?
All right. I'll give you. This is one of my favorites. Okay. This is. I got in front of me a list of the Apports from Corley Hall in a very short period of time, and I'm going to put my glasses on. The first one was the Lapis Lazuli. There was a book, The Sayings of Pahotep, that appeared in a bookcase. The Gemstone book, which was written in 1886, that was handwritten and is almost faint. It's unreadable now. We had turquoise. We had a stone which was called the Eye of Fire, and that was one for Angela. Lace agate for astral projection, that came to me. An opal matrix for memory. Tiger's eye. We had 2 tiger's eye Apports that night. And so sometimes we would have three Apports in the night, 4 Apports sometimes, because it was on a roll. My favorite, this is a good one. Okay, Lilac Obelisk, it says here, knowledge, the Rock of Darth. Well, what happened was, we were doing the board, and we had a contact called Addie, Addie, and she first appeared as a young girl. Not literally appeared. I think we did. I don't know. I don't think we'd cope with that, really. She was supposed to have lived in the house, although towards the end, we'd seen so much stuff happening. And so many things have manifested inside that place and outside. We were really up for it. If she'd materialised, I think we'd have been quite happy to make her a cup of tea. You know, we drank nothing but Earl Grey in those days, and you know, it was like the psychic questing cuppa is an Earl Grey. If you're into psychic questing, you smoke Marlboros and you drink Guinness. It's just what you do, you know. As Omar.
Were the Apports like requested, or did it like,
No.
or were they referred to in the session in any way?
Yeah, the book that came through, which was written in 1886, was written supposedly by somebody called Johnny Jones, and there's a dedication inside it to Nell something. I've got it written down somewhere. I actually had to write down every page of that book, even including the spelling mistakes and the crossings out, because it was starting to fade even when we got it. It was really tatty. It really felt like something old, you know. And in there, they listed, were listed all of these different coloured stones. Now, what we didn't know at the time, although we were informed subsequently, was those stones had appeared to the Eye of Fire group. Now, if you read the book, it's just the Eye of Fire. That's the big thing. There were lots of others, and it got so convoluted. And there was this thing called the Bane, which haunted them. That's in the book, but there's far more to the story than that. And if you can get hold of, go onto Kindle, get hold of Susan Boyd Lee's In Search of the Eye of Fire, because it's a brilliant read. You get a good feel of what happened as a supplementary thing. And the Bane was something that had turned, but it was like the collective, you know, Forbidden Planet, the id. It was that sort of monster. And Graham suffered horrendously, and he wasn't the only one. A couple of people lost it after that. This is where psychic energy, and it comes back to Mark Stavish. The Skype session I had with Mark after hearing him on your program was fantastic. We talked about egregores and erigores, you know, and that whole thing about something builds up, and once it turns or it gets fractured, it's not something you want on your doorstep. You don't want it in your life, physically, emotionally, mentally. It can be like that thing at the beginning. You know, it could be the Marshmallow Man. You got a bad one if you got that. And yes, it really is like that. It has a huge amount of you in it. So if you've got two people in that group that really don't like each other, or you've got jealousy forming, it can manifest. We were lucky we didn't have any of that. But Addy, you know, would tell. I mean, I've got recordings of this. Still got recordings on cassette, and they were in very good condition considering they were done in '89. And one of my favourites is because sometimes they didn't. Sometimes I would press the record button on a really decent cassette player recorder, and we would get crystal clear recordings of the Apports coming through, and then sometimes press the record button and nothing would happen. When I came, I would play it back and you could hear the voices and you think, yeah, levels are great, everybody's in balance, and a microphone would be placed somewhere near the middle of the table that the five of us were around, and it would be really good. But you know, on playback, very often it would just fade out to white noise and go, and there would be nothing to show for it until the session ended and the noise would come back. We could hear the teacups moving around and things, people talking. So this, whatever it is, and we all talk about a trickster like we've always known about it, but the thing would not let itself be recorded. I wonder why that is. We had a video camera. Martin had the same thing. It would go white noise with a line across it.
Well, you know, though, that you know, those type of devices are electromagnetic. Maybe it's a buildup of magnetism in the room that's causing them not to record.
It was, yeah. I think it might have been that, actually.
So it may not have been intentional. It may not have been them blocking it. You know what I mean? I mean, it could have been. But there's also the possibility that the environmental change caused the problem with the equipment.
I do wonder if you're right. I mean, the first colour TVs, I used to work in a repair workshop. They had to be degaussed all the time because they would build up static on the screen. They were monsters. Yeah, they were the size of a wardrobe, and they chucked out thousands of volts on the anode and stuff, you know. But the static around those was, you know, terrible. And I do wonder, because the effects, you know, I'm used to radios, shortwave AM and, you know, FM. I've done a lot with that over the years, and this had white noise. This sounded like AM white noise on shortwave. It had that sound to it, you know. Yeah, so I mean, in this book were listed all of the gemstones, which were repeats of what the old group had had. They destroyed theirs because they wanted to get rid of the bane. It seemed something was quite keen for us to have those stones, and we took them and we sort of cherished them. Really, we had them made into rings. In the book, it would say this stone is yellow. Its metal is copper. It is for finding things that are lost, and its name is Shu, S-H-U. Well, I had that made up into a ring with a copper back onto it with Shu engraved on it, and it was for finding things that are lost or, you know, knowledge. And if you see the figure of Shu, which is an Egyptian deity, he's holding two pillars apart, and it's basically a solar thing. And we had a huge Egyptian undercurrent to what we did. My favorite apport, the one that Ange and I had a lot to do with. Now, bearing in mind, we hadn't had a copy of the Green Stone in the flat. We'd read it so long ago, and I'd more or less forgotten a huge amount of it. And that night, Martin had brought round a copy, and he said, "Anybody want to read this? Anybody want to borrow it?" So we said, "Yeah, great." Oh, you know, just because we hadn't read it for so long, and Graham was there, we could fire 1,000 questions at him. And we had a huge chaise lounge with a red cover on it in the big bedsit room. We did all our stuff in the kitchen around a farmhouse table. And what's interesting for me was that, I had to find another word really. What was fascinating was the energy when we were doing this stuff. Very often it would be like a frosty night outside, and the moon would be up, and there were odd things like we had similarities with the Skoll experiment. I mean, they came after us. Our stuff had come and gone and finished before the Skoll people came along with their stuff, and they kept it quiet for a long time. We had almost the same phenomena as they did. We didn't set out to prove life after death or to record it. We didn't set out to test it in any way. We just went with what we got and loved it. It was a white knuckle ride for us. It was great. And we had a similar thing to them, that they were you go for the spirit model, and it's a spirit that gives you these things, a spirit that does all of these manifestations, a spirit gives you an apport, and you have to ask so many questions in and around that. You have to define what a spirit is. Is it the spirit of somebody deceased? Is it a spirit that, you know, like a Goetia spirit that is having you on? Is it a genius loci type spirit? You know, when you use the spirit and bandy it around so easily, without, you know, we just, you know, you can accept that role, you can accept that model, or like the Skoll thing, they had that model. These are spirits that come and communicate with us, long dead scientists and so forth. But they also had the energy model, which intrigued me far, far more. Now, Ange had this total inspiration one day to put some quartz crystal onto the Ouija board, because she got a good collection of stuff. She had a really nice chunk of amethyst, which had come from North Wales, and a quartz crystal cluster. And she put them. And Addie, you could see the glass going backwards and forwards. It would go from one to another. Like the glass had a little thing inside it, having a look at what these things were. It was really funny. And she wrote it. She came out on the board and she spelled out the letters. What are these for? And Anne said, well, you know, I just thought they might power up the board a bit, or make it more interesting, or maybe give it a bit of extra energy. And she said, would you like me to merge them? Would you like me to fuse them? And Anne said, go on then. So the board started going round and round and round and round. And this was the pattern for an apport usually. And these were fun times for us, real fun times, you know, trying to hang on to the glass when it was going round and round, hanging on and looking at each other and sort of laughing a little bit. And it stopped. And the long story short is, it said, Andy said to us, go next door. And we said, where is it? Where's the apport? Underneath and it was something like, you know, the stone that is green underneath the red something. And it was this bit of a rhyming couplet, which almost rhymed if you sort of bent the letters a bit. And we went next door and we thought, yeah, clever bit coming up here. It's going to be under the Greenstone book, which was on the chaise lounge. And it wasn't. And we pulled back the cover and it wasn't underneath there. We pulled back the chaise lounge and all you got was a red carpet. There was nothing. And we thought, oh, okay. There's a slight moment of disappointment.
Sure.
And Anne said, she's probably mucking us around a bit. It sounds like one of her jokes. And we walked, as we turned round and walked back into the kitchen, and suddenly turned around. This is what happens. You get this nudge. It's something like something grabs your shoulders, turns you around, and it was there. And it was an obelisk. I'll send you a picture of this. It was an obelisk, probably about 6 or 7 inches long, lilac blue, and it actually looks like a mixture of lapis lazuli. It looks a bit like amethyst, and it looks a bit crystal. And we never had it analysed to see what it was, although people have said it was, I'm not well up on crystals and things like that, but we have had people look at it and go, oh yeah, I know what this is. And it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And it was that moment where your back is turned and it's there. And I wonder if it's to do with this whole sort of quantum physics thing about observing the experiment and then turning away and it becomes something else. We didn't know what we were going to get. We had no idea whatsoever. Nobody said, you're going to get an Apport. This is what it's going to be. We never had that once. It was always a surprise, the things we got. I hadn't included the book. I never heard of an Apport, a book arriving, And, just as a quick one, Addy said, this is the Rock of Darth, which you'd know from the Kabbalah.
Okay. All right. So as far as books appearing, what brings to mind is the Seattle, what are they calling it? The Seattle Demon House or wherever, where he had Bibles appearing.
Oh.
And they would always be singed, and they couldn't replicate that. I forget the Steve, what's his name from the UK? When he was doing the research, they couldn't replicate the singeing of the Bible without the whole thing going up.
Yeah, I know.
So my question to you, though, is when you have these apports, were they warm to the touch afterwards?
Some of them did feel like that. There was some we had later outside of Corley Hall, which appeared like that. I mean, the photograph. I mean, I think you've probably seen that by now. I think I might have sent you one of those. The best thing was, and it was a recording that Greg used. It was the photograph appearing, and Ange had done a drawing, and we had to go in and look at this drawing on an easel. Addy said, top right, I am top right. You wanted to know what I look like. And we had an Apport of a photograph of a school photo, sepia, with little kids on it in some school, and it's singed around the outside. But do you know the Matthew Manning stuff? Do you know?
No.
Oh, Seriah. Yeah, okay, Matthew Manning, very Englishman. As a public school boy, they were very scared of him at school because he had lots of poltergeist activity. And he lived in a place in the Fens where he was basically in touch. It was almost like a time slip thing with people that had lived in the house before him. And Robert, what was his name? It'll come to me. It's a wonderful book. He did one called The Link as well about his experiment. The book is called The Strangers. And he had a photograph, and it was singed around the outside. I've seen apported photographs in books from the spiritualist days, and they seem to be singed. The vertical plane, people knocked the vertical plane, blah, 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 it's this and it's that. People who weren't there. But one of the things that made me seriously wonder what was going on was a photograph disappeared of a jaguar, and it came back, and it was singed around the outside. That's almost par for the course. In the same way you never see an Apport appear, that's par for the course. Just when you turn around, you look the other way, something will happen. And the whole phenomena is like that. Apports fascinate me because I've looked into people have been scanning documents for a long time now in the old records from the spiritualist church and psychic research, since the 20s and so forth. And there are some incredible things in there. And people make the assumption that they're all fakes, but they were studied under very close conditions, these people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you find familiar things happening. Flowers was always a favorite in the spiritualist church, but some people had trinkets, some people had gemstones, which is what we had. We had one series of apports, and it was almost like this being that we were in contact with. And she sort of said, "What's this on the table?" And we said, "Well, it's like Earl Grey tea. It's in a teapot." what's it for? And we said, well, you taste it, you know. So we had to try this stuff and taste it. We had a little light on the table. What's this? This is light. And you know, I was playing my guitar. What are you doing? I explained whatever. And then basically went through all of the 5 senses. We had to describe what the heart was. And we said, you know, it's this and it's that. And we had these little Chinese charms apported. And and again, you build up the synchronicities that lead up to these things. Small things at face value, like tarot cards, the surface value of what's on that picture, building up a quote from a Bible, bibliomancy. And you have all of these things happening, but you have synchronicities in and around UFOs appearing, paranormal events appearing. You have something that wasn't there suddenly becoming physical. And I talked to Josh about, you know, at great length about this, the Fae and things coming and going. And, you know, Apports have fascinated me for a long time, because with UFOs and ufology, I think the whole field, the egregore, if you can call it that, is, I think it's really sour. I think it's played out. I think it's got too many big egos in it. Mm-hmm. You can't quantify any of it. You can't really do much research with it. And if you're going to go the science, you know, the measuring thing and blah, 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 you can do that. But it's not the same as experiencing something. People that have these experiences in front of their noses, it changes something inside how you look at the world after that. And you know, the thing I have found is that magicians are very often the last people to get these things, and they're the first people to protest. I mean, I know a good friend of mine across here, I don't see him anymore, Solomonic magician and alchemist and stuff like that, never had anything happen at all, ever. He was very good at micromanaging things and so forth, never had anything happen. And he could accept it happening to other people. And I've met other magicians that say, well, I've been a magician for 30 years and I've done this and I've done that and I've done all the other stuff, and that's never happened to me. We've had it from pagans, Wiccans, all of that. But, you know, meditators get it. A friend of mine, when she started meditating, she was in a yoga group, an apple appeared in the palms of her hands that were folded. Within Tibetan Buddhism, I've seen loads of stuff. Well, I worked for the Tibet Foundation. Namkhai Norbu came in when I was in London in '87. And he got his book, and I met him, and he a book about the term, a tradition in Tibet and so forth. And that intrigued me, because when I used to spend lots of time in Tibetan Buddhism. I took refuge in '74. And I've seen things that happened in and around the meditation center run by my teacher, Chime. You know, things would appear on the shrine and they would go a couple of days ago, you know, later. So it happens to meditators. It's interesting that Paramahansa Yogananda, you know, Muktananda and all those sort of people had things happen, coming in and going out and so forth. There's something about the passive state, I think.
Well, too, it happens to people experiencing poltergeists and things like that as well, but they just attribute it to the poltergeist.
I'm unsure about the poltergeist connection. You see, we never had any polter activity at all.
Right, but people who are experiencing poltergeists, for instance, might have stones thrown at them from inside the house, or things like that occur, which are basically apports.
Yeah, see, this is why I go for a subdivision of the word apport. I think apport for me has to be subjective, because it's based upon my experiences and those closest to me and people I've known quite well. They are more of a gift than a poltergeist which throws something at you. It is, right, for me, there's a distinction.
Sure, but I think that the mechanism is the same.
Yes. Definitely the mechanism, yeah. But I think that they're more than just the mechanism for me. You know, I mean, just the last one I had, I mean, this is just brief, really, yeah. And I didn't expect this. There's an old stone circle up near where I live with huge, you know, beautiful views of the landscape. It's on the Welsh border, a place called Pennywern. And I went up there March last year, March the 1st, with the same impulse. You must go up on the hill, go up there now. And it wasn't a great day. It was great. It was overcast, windy, and the place was covered in mud. You couldn't even see where anything was. It was just a big, boggy, muddy field that had been ploughed, and it was full of cow muck. And I wore my wellies. I must have known it was going to be bad. And for some reason, I went to one of the stones which is there, and you have to pass it before you get to the circle. And I stopped and I put my hands on it, mostly to keep out of the way of the wind because it was cutting across the fields. And I got the image of a Jacob's ladder, the Tesla thing, and it was bands of colours going up it from the ground upwards, and then they stabilised and became milk white. At that moment, I could hear a voice saying healing, and I didn't know if it meant me, it meant the site. I have no idea. And I went up to the site and I started walking clockwise, just gradually walking into the middle and looking for bits of wood I could take home and carve, because there's some big pine trees, anything really that might be interesting. And there was nothing. And as I walked away from that, I really turned around again. You're spinning on you. You could turn on a sixpence, I think we call it here. And there was, and it hadn't been there before because the place was covered in mud. There was a really nice white chunk of what I thought was quartz crystal, and it was almost luminescent on a grey day with not one ray of sunshine. And me having trodden that place, it was there, and there wasn't a spot of muck on it. It was pure. And I found out later from a friend of mine that it was citrine with quartz inclusions in it. Now, it was exactly the same colour that I'd seen the first stone turn to. So it had gone from all the bounded colours into that colour white, and that was the citrine with the quartz inclusions that had appeared. And I got a friend of mine who does horary astrology to look at it, and they said it was Venus in the 12th house, which sort of, from their point of view, confirmed it, really. You see, I didn't go looking for that. What's that? Is that the energy model? Is that something in the landscape? Is it a genius loci? I have no idea. But when I think about those two guys in, they put a great case up for poltergeist stuff, the two Navajo Rangers in that documentary they did, that presentation on YouTube. It's fantastic. The poltergeist stuff and the Apports they had turned very nasty. If you know that program at all.
I don't.
It's all right, you'd have a field day with it. They're two Navajo Rangers, and it's a 2-hour documentary. And what I really like about it, which comes back to the Skinwalker conversation you had with Josh and a few other people, I wasn't enamored with it. I thought it was over dramatized. I didn't like the music in the background, and it was, when you got that sort of music and that sort of dun, 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 it leads you emotionally into prejudging it. And you don't need to do that. These two rangers are policemen. Every paranormal experience that they investigate is approached from a police point of view. The documentation, the clinical recording of information, interviews, plaster casts. They've got a team that works with them, a government team, and they wouldn't talk about they wouldn't talk about them at all. But they have immense resources to go and look at this stuff, and they treat every case seriously. They don't humiliate people. They don't belittle people. They listen to people, and there's so much going on that Navajo reservation. It's just incredible. You love it. Everything is there. And they go to one case where there was a poltergeist and it started throwing money, and it followed them home, this contagion thing. I think Tim Renner that coined that phrase, and it's good because this stuff can follow. Yeah, I mean, I think Josh mentioned it. This stuff can follow you home. It followed the people home from Skinwalker Ranch,
or some of them anyway.
Yes, yeah. Interesting to me that it was the people with attitude, the confrontation, and that they took home. Whereas with the Navajo Rangers, this stuff followed them home as well, and they started throwing money. And I think somebody said, why doesn't it send dollar bills or $10 bills? And at that moment it was said, a folded bill appeared with the word die on it, DIE, and they had to have lots. I mean, that would creep me out. I've seen some stuff, but I've not seen that. That's unpleasant,
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what was the name of the documentary?
I can't remember. But you'd only have to put Navajo Rangers on YouTube, and I can send you the link. Of course, I don't have to do it now. I can send you the link. Right. You'd love it. You'd really love it.
Okay.
I actually feel there was more in that than there was the Skinwalker thing with. I don't want to upset anybody. Please, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. This documentary is straightforward with no drama, no whatever. This is just information.
Yeah. what was the question I just had for you? Let's. So when we're talking about things being warm, I find that connection, like I said, with poltergeist stuff. I find it with that whole demon house thing, but I also find it with like Bigfoot encounters when they're supposedly throwing stones, because rarely do people see anything throwing stones, but the stones are always warm. And there have been cases of people in the wilderness where it's literally rained stones, and the stones are warm. And so that to me, that gives us a clue as to what's going on with the apportation potentially, that it's generating heat in some way.
Yes, it's you exchange energy. You exchange energy from a physical object. Is it because, UFOs, the way they change color, is it because they come from a different energy state when they start cooling down through the atmosphere? I have no idea. I'm trying to cram something in, quart into a pint pot, but there's something happens about the almost the vibration of a piece of metal. You've only got to heat a piece of metal up, as you know, and it changes color. Maybe these things are, from one dimension to another, a high frequency to a low frequency. I think Lethbridge was in there somewhere. I think he understood that.
Really?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, somewhere, because he was doing incredible work with pendulums. He could detect, and what he found was that objects often had a field which was next to them, which was the higher frequency or the octave of that thing, whatever the energy signature was. You could get something like a first harmonic or a second or a third harmonic above that, and that came up. That whole subject came up in one of the Apports. Silver notes produce clear harmonies. That was the card. Oh, definitely. I mean, if you understand, do you know what troubles me really? One part of me would love. I'm not just, I'm not having a go at the people that do stuff in laboratories and get paper clips to jump up and down. That's just mincing stuff. That doesn't mean anything. As one of your guests said recently, shouldn't we have something bigger to look for than that? Shouldn't we set our sights higher? What I've seen was incredible, but no parapsychologist, nobody's going to look at that because it's too much. You give them a little bit of something and they love it. Give them too much and they just dismiss it straight away.
Well, because it must be fake.
Yeah, but that's the assumption so many people make. And you have to admit, with the ufology and whatever that is, there are a huge amount of fakes and fakers and charlatans and things.
Oh yeah.
Within the physical manifestation and materialism, physical materialization. God, I'm pretty juiced. There are fakers within that on the psychic circuit and with mediums and things. But when you go down to the small level of people sitting in front rooms, just trying it out to see what happens, small groups that have met for 10, I met spiritualists that were still meeting on a Wednesday or a Saturday after 20 years and sometimes more, just to go and sit and do their meditation and do their open mediumship circle. And they were getting results, but they didn't broadcast it. It was by invite only. We had 5 people, and we never let anybody else in on it. Sometimes we'd have an observer. Sometimes we would have a friend of the old group come and sit in, but we always kept it to 5. We never invited anybody else in. And for a long, long time, nobody knew what we were doing at all,
Why 5?
It's just how it turned out.
Okay.
There was Ange and myself, there was Martin and Anne and Martin, and there was Graham. And we just found we got really good results. And I think there was also, when we got the swords and we got the first Apport, Graham said, look, I'll ask you if you could keep this to yourself for a bit, because people know we're getting this stuff. They will want to join in. They'll all want to be part of it. And, I got to take my hat off to Graham, because he was right, really, because when people did find out what we were doing and what we were getting, so many people said, can I come around and join? Can I do this? And can I, if you never need a hand with anything, it doesn't work like that. Everything that ever happened to us, we were invited into it by some greater force, or by circumstances, or by, I don't think it's cause and effect. We had so many synchronicities, all of us. Sometimes you got the feeling it was an overriding intelligence from the 1800s, from the old group that was still manipulating things, making things happen to fulfill its purpose, or unresolved things from the 1800s, the breakup of the magical group, the Fire Phoenix, the original Mianai group. And then sometimes you think there's no sense to this at all until, 1, 2, 10, 20 years time, you are still getting synchronicities related to it. Time doesn't mean anything in this at all.
Yeah.
And
Well,
cause and effect, Seriah. I have no faith in cause and effect at all. It only seems to work at the most mundane level in physics.
Well, okay. What is your personal feeling that what's behind this?
Are you talking about generally with the whole phenomena? Like a unified...
generally, or what you were experiencing.
Right. Generally, I feel it's a totally organic thing. Everything from somebody who goes into the woods and has a stone thrown at them, or sees a Sasquatch, or sees a UFO, people that see the dogs and all the other stuff that's ever been documented. I think it's all the same thing. And I think it has a huge amount to do with the people that are seeing it. I feel it's totally organic. It's almost a reaction, a safety valve, if you can call it, on human emotions generally. I think if you put 100 Tibetan lamas, advanced lamas, in a room and got them doing stuff, their physical phenomena would be radically different to the general sort of unwashed masses. Who don't read, think, or whatever. You just get a different manifestation of things. I don't understand it, because what we had happened to us, what was going on in the village that time, and I tried to explain this to Josh recently, what was going on in the village, what was going on in the town, what was going on, and you move out and move out and move out, and because stuff was happening all the time. Within that half hour to an hour we were doing stuff, it was happening all over the planet, and different aspects of whatever it is were going on. And I think it's this totally organic, intelligent, in the way that the Gaia theory is intelligent. It's a self-regulating mechanism with probably no personality behind it. Intelligence, if it has any, might be trying to communicate or get us to think. It might be a higher form of education. Give people a mirror. What do you see when you hold up the mirror? Like monkeys and cats seeing themselves. What it meant for me personally was the complete breakdown of everything I thought I knew. Everything I cherished, from third year physics, from spiritualism, from Buddhism, to everything that I'd come through, the UFO stuff, everything, it just blew it all apart, time and time and time again. And that was its great gift. It was the greatest gift that could have ever happened to me. Quantum physics, quantum entanglement, it got me really back into consciousness without being identified with Buddhism. I realized the connections between things. I had one experience up in the hills where one moment I saw everything from the appearance of the smallest particle and how short that was, to galaxies coming and going, and the whole time meant nothing. I saw every act of love that had ever been given to me in my life, things I didn't even know about, my conception. Everything happened, and it was no cause and effect, no time, and all I could say was thank you. And that came after a complete breakdown of all of the deeply held beliefs, ideas, and whatever, because an Apport will do that to you. It can be anything from a UFO appearing, and it can be just something that lands at your feet that you don't see happening. I still don't understand it. I have no theory on it all. I just have little glimpses where I see it, how it connects to everything else. It's the link to me between every bit of psychic phenomena, every little bit of physics which you can't quite make out or understand. But you see, I haven't got the vocabulary, as you probably understood. I don't have the brain to figure it out. I'm not Jacques Vallée. I'm not a lateral thinker in the way I would like to be. and I'm just struggling to make sense of it, but I love it. I love it. I really do, you know. And do you know the weird thing is about when you have your first Apport? I've met people that have said, oh, we had an Apport. And you go, yeah, okay, great. You know, and you swap notes and you think, yeah, that sounds about right. We had so many. When I got hold of Ange some while back, I was saying, what about this? What about that? Do you know, I'd forgotten about some of the Apports we had. Completely forgotten. They stopped being this huge mind-blowing thing that you cherish, that becomes a relic that you put on your shelf and you put in the little special Apport box and it starts getting full. So you have another Apport box and you start cramming it because that one's full. And then, you know, you give a few away because why not? You've got so many. You forget the sheer brick through the windows sort of experience that it was, you know, which intrigues me. And I think that's for a good reason. You move on, you leave it behind. I don't think they should become relics. I don't. I think that's not a good thing.
Right. You don't want to put too much importance into them.
No, not really. I mean, I've got a couple around here. You can have if you want them.
Well, tell me about that first one, the tooth.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of tooth was it?
It was a herbivore. It was a cow. Yeah, it was big, really big. Well, I mean, do you know the interesting thing? We didn't understand the significance. And when we got in touch with Andy, he turned up with Paul Weston. I mean, Paul, I recommend Paul very highly. Paul Weston's books, crammed full of psychic questing and real wacky stuff. And he writes really well. He speaks very well. I arrogantly recommend you get Paul to behind the microphone sometime. You would not be disappointed. He turned up with Andy and we got talking about this. We saw the swords and whatever. And then I showed him the tooth and he just collapsed laughing, really, because that's how it had started for him. He was with the Sunderland family and they were up in North Wales, and a tooth which had disappeared a few days earlier reappeared. It went bing, bounced off the shelf. So what's being played out there? The swords are to do with him, which were, you know, because he found the original one. We had the Apport of the tooth. That was to do with Andy. That was where it started for him, which is where it started for us. You know, what was being replayed? What kind of things are bouncing around the universes that they need to, you know, it was like an echo of something.
And that also, you know, you just mentioned like things disappearing and reappearing, but you find that in certain UFO cases, like the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. You know, the people living there would find their stuff just disappearing, you know, and then they'd show up somewhere else. Even the cows or the bulls there in the one case.
Yeah. You see, I had a conversation with Josh about that, and I said, what would the Fae? You see, but I also have this thing about what do they think about us? If there is a they, whether it's Fae, whether it's, you know, Sasquatch or whatever, what do they see when they look at us, really? What's their take on us, you know? Do we scare them? Do we this, that, and the other? But with the bulls, I said to Josh, you know, do you think this guy said, what's the most important thing in that man's life at that moment? It's the protection of those bulls, because it ensures his livelihood for the next whatever it is. You know, they're the most precious thing he has. And his statement was, we lose those, basically we're doomed. And yet something answered in a very, very peculiar, almost lateral way. And it put them in the one place that would protect them more than anything else. It put them inside a tin can that you can't get in or out of. Where would they be safer than that?
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that was the case, but that was my first take on it.
Yeah. It seems like a response.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Somebody saying, yeah, we'll sort it out for you, mate. You know, you go back down to the shop, like 60-mile drive there and back. You know, don't you leave it with us. You're okay. You know, we'll look after you. But it might be that they don't understand. We don't understand them. Maybe there's some. And I felt this in my life. There's something that has appeared in my life every now and again, which has said, look at it this way. Okay, we're going to show you some synchronicities. We're going to give you some Bible readings. So you go through a huge, you know, my favorite example outside of the Apports was, I used to go to a centre called Tannigarth when I was in my early 20s, and it was a yoga center. And it was run by a man called Ken Ratcliffe, and we would meet there at the weekends. And he held up this book one day when we were all in a circle in the drawing room, and he said to one chap, "This is for your this is for your development." Excuse me. He said, "This is for you. Have you got a question?" And the guy would say, "Yeah." So he would get hold of the book and go backwards and forwards, put his finger down, and then he would read out the one line that was there, and it would be really, really, really appropriate to that man. And what he did to me was he said, "This is for your development for the next year." So I got the book, went backwards and forwards, and it said, "There, bhikkhu," which is a Buddhist monk, "there, bhikkhu, go into the hermitage, full stop. There live the life of the Buddha." And I left home very soon after that. I was 18, and I found a flat in the county town where I was working. And I said to it was a beautiful place with oak beams running through it. It was built in 1604. And I said to the landlord one day, not long after, I said, "This is a fantastic place. I love it." He said, "Yeah, it used to be called the Hermitage." No, great, isn't it? Do you know, another one that happened recently, I got hold of the Combs and Holland book on synchronicity, and I was going into to Ludlow on the bus, and I went there for some shopping, and I grabbed this book and I thought, I'll go and get a coffee, sit down, have a quiet read. And I went into the cafe because all the other cafes were full, plunked it down on the table. The waitress came across and she said, "Oh, I believe in synchronicities. I believe in and all that, blah, 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 crystals, flying saucers, Atlantis and everything." And she said, "Do you know, I was lying on my back the other night and I asked for a synchronicity for somebody to come into my life who would show me the next step, the information that I'm after." And I turned up with a book on synchronicities. And I thought, she said, "Oh, I asked God." And I said, "Well, I don't think God's that literal, actually. He works in mysterious ways, But the thing is, for her, she got exactly what she wanted. The most obvious, literal, here's the synchronicity. And that happens so many times. Read Kirby Surprise, his stuff on synchronicity, and it's a fantastic book. And he seems to have disappeared off the radar. My suspicion is he probably got swamped with stories about synchronicities from other people.
Yeah. It seems like anytime you delve into any of this stuff, the synchronicities start flowing.
They do.
But to me, it tends to be you're on the right track.
Oh, very much, very much. Daft things appear and often at surface, face value. I mean, going back to the days with Addie, in the group, she would tell us. I mean, one of the Apports appeared when we were working with Graham, and this contact said, "Shuffle the cards." So we got the tarot pack out, the Rider-Waite, and shuffled it, and you got the magician, with his arms pointing heaven and earth, mediated between heaven and earth. And this contact said to Ange, "Do magician." So what do you mean, do magician? Now, at that time, we had dried flowers all around the room, and when she stood there and pointed the fingers, she looked like the magician card. And the board started going round, and it said, and it was totally face value. And she said, see red, look red, see red. And Angie's red scarf was in her coat pocket at the time. And we couldn't understand what it meant at the time, but she put her hand into her pocket and there was one of the Apports there. Things like that.
Wow.
Totally face value. It's almost like you need all of the bits of the puzzle, like a Rubik's Cube, to fall into place and then bump. But the thing is, what really disturbs me? If you ever found out how to do it, somebody will weaponize it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I find. That's why I want somebody to come up with an answer before I die and say, "Look, we found out how it works. Great. I love it. I'd love that, But I know that the moment they discover that, somebody somewhere will start putting billions into weaponizing it.
Yeah. How can we use this to our advantage?
Yeah, straight away. Monetize it. I don't see that happening somehow. But, I really don't think it would happen because this whole thing is so tricksy. Really tricksy. I mean, I'm not even in terms of the trickster. It's got its own laws, which are outside the physical laws of the universe. It behaves in ways that, we always assume you can go 5,000, 10,000 miles that direction. You can go 500,000 miles or 1,000,000 miles, and the physics is going to be the same. You might just pop through a wormhole or some space where none of that applies. And I think the dimensions that are closest to us are very unstable, and I don't think you could ever really master them. Otherwise, nothing would change. Nothing would come in and out. Nothing would develop as a, in terms of energy and people and things. And I think we probably mucked it up. I think it's, going back to the Paul F. Eno stuff, about the dimensions near to us and 11 dimensions. I think he has a lot to say, which I can resonate with. I can relate to. And I think we had to be very careful about, which is all these UFO people have contacts and channeling things. They all say, be careful of the environment, stop letting off bombs and stuff. It's because probably what we do here upsets the dimension right next door to us, and probably the other way around as well. But I don't know, Seriah. I mean, I'm just talking out of my arse at the moment. I have no answers. These are just thoughts I've collected, over a long time, really.
Well, I think our concept of reality is wrong. I think that's part of it. We look at this stuff and we think, oh yeah, we got this all down, but we don't realize how little our senses actually tell us. There's scientific measuring, but that's also running through our senses and our biases, whether we try to eliminate them or not. And if reality conforms even the tiniest bit to what we expect, then all that stuff gets thrown out the window. There's no way to do it in an empirical sense.
No, you're quite right. I mean, the five senses are... I had this conversation with somebody a few days ago, really. It's a good job they're there. It's a good job we do have the five senses. It's a good job we are so blinkered as we are, because we'd never cope with the world. Being bombarded. He was somebody who's done psychedelics, and he was relating his experiences. And I said, but you can't have that world every day. This is where the whole hippie thing came unstuck. The idea that everybody could just do what they wanted and take drugs and whatever. Can you imagine how you'd never get the buses to run on time. You could never use a language to do your banking, to get the post in the mail. You could never have eBay and all the other things like that. You could never have this, because it would be so haphazard and unpredictable. All the colors, the sounds, the smells, everything you'd be bombarded with. It's a good job we have the five senses which filter everything out. In Buddhism, they say the mind is the sixth sense, which does the interpreting, which it does. And I think that's the crux of it, really. When I still hear people saying, well, seeing is believing. And I said, no, it isn't.
Yeah.
And they don't like it because, I don't know, really. Reality, that's another word you'd have to reinvent something for, I think.
True.
I've seen reality, what I thought was reality, blown out of the water so many times. I haven't been into the UFO stuff because it got covered with Greg, and it's long, it's just turgid if you're not interested. The focal point is the Apports, because that was reality. I saw something that wasn't there, and it appeared, and you could measure it. You could do, you could weigh it. You could take good pictures of it, and you had 2 or 3 of those in a row. Where do they come from? Where do they go to when they dematerialize, if that's what happens? And why? You never appear to get an Apport over 200 years old. You never seem to get anything that's worth any money. Yeah, I've noticed that. It's like you look at the ghosts thing, you rarely see ghosts that are over 200 years old. You might get the odd centurion in a place where they might have marched to like a Roman camp or something, but very, very rarely. And that comes back to the Tom Lethbridge stuff again. He would douse for an area where you got a say like Beachy Head, where people lot of throw Beachy Head in Britain, where people do throw themselves off. It's a spot like some bridges are, and he could feel this very depressed spirit there. And he went with his pendulum and he measured out. He called them a ghoul because you could measure this field. You could you could go up to it and touch it where it began. And as you moved back a foot, it wasn't there anymore. And I've experienced that outside Shrewsbury Library, Llanrydder, some old stone circle stuff up there. And you can walk up to it and you go, wow. And you can sense it very clearly. And it's not there all the time. It can be influenced by solar activity, lunar activity. So reality is so fickle because it's changing all the time. It's fluent. It's it's in flux all the time, and with five senses, we grasp the smallest part of it, really.
Agreed. And we're just about out of time.
Oh,
If people want to reach you, how can they do that?
do you know? I don't know. I don't have a website. But when you say this to Sheryl Lee Black, are you going to write a book? How do people get hold of you? I don't really have anything. Sorry, they could get hold of you if they do. Send to you if that's okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm interested to hear from anybody, and if anybody wants a Skype session, I'm up for that to talk about their experiences. I love this. I love Skype more than anything. I've had some great conversations, and really with people that you've interviewed that I've listened to, and I thought, wow, I'd just love to be able to talk to that person. And Greg as well. He's been very kind to put me onto
Greg's
a couple
awesome.
of people. Oh, I love the guy. He's my favorite ukulele player. And there's so many things. The one thing I do enjoy when I get hold of Greg is he normally fires up. And how you doing? Because I don't catch up with him too often as I'd like, really. And we get the guitars out and we play. And the next thing is to get Josh playing the tuba, but he has to probably stand about 20 feet away from the microphone just so it's at the right level. And because you can get him in the frame then. Tuba's a big instrument, I'd like to do a jam session with them. I really would.
And I want to give an extra special thanks to some people who have gone above and beyond helping me out recently. Allison Cook, Dominic O'Malley, Susan Sabota, Patricia Gayaquinta, and Arif Akhtar, as well as all the patrons pledging $10 or more. Super Inframan, Andy McNamara, Charles Beauregard, Craig Cisternos, Scott Morris Everett, Robert Groom, Riker and Stark, Russell Wilcoxon, Sasha Lorg, Christopher Vaughn, Samantha, Carla Mahoney, John Eddy, Chris, Mark Brady, William Lovelace, Kevin Schreck, Alex Bose, Jose Alatorre, Ben, and Alfred Tuttle. Thank you all so very much. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Just scratching the surface there with Charles. We will have him back to expand on some of that stuff, and there's a lot of stuff we didn't talk about. So you can also check out his conversation with Greg Bishop and Red Pill Junkie on Radio Mysterioso. That was a few weeks ago from the airing of this. So that will give you, a little more data to fill out as they kind of went in a different direction, focusing on the psychic questing and stuff. And so we, as I said, we'll have him back. We'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.